in the global system, but also relating to South-South cooperation and relationships. And it's very good that we focus now on this area as elemental, fundamental element of sustainable development. I mean, we all are pretty much very clear that the 2030 agenda or sustainable development goals, they need peace and a proper management of conflicts so that sustainable development can be realized. I'm very happy now that we have a quite diverse, a fascinating panel of experts from various regions and various areas of engagement. So just to go down the line, we have Mr. Carlos from Brazil, a military research institution. We have Mr. Kaustov from a more research-oriented civil society group, if I understand it correctly. And we have Mr. Dennis from UN Office of South-South Cooperation, which is one of the co-hosts here, so thank you very much. And then we have Mr. Deepak. He's with a research institution in Nepal, and Professor Ruchita, she's an expert, a scholar from an Indian institution. So as we go through the presentations, I would ask you to kindly try to be as concrete and specific as possible in referring to instances or examples where we can already look at the impact and the effects of South-South and triangular cooperations for peace and conflict management. So give us, please, some idea about specific cases that we can look at. The second point there that I'm very interested in is what are the lessons learned from these specific cases and examples, real-life empirical evidence that you're looking at. And then something that came up in the previous sessions, what can we conceive of as the sort of a multilateral framework where all these examples and the experiences are brought together? What institutional frameworks are you aware of or can you think of so that these individual cases of South-South and trilateral cooperation are brought into a larger context and the different actors there can learn from each other and maybe even talk about some sort of meta-governance in this specific area. Of course, particularly here I'm referring to the existing mechanisms and institutional frameworks of the United Nations, but also of the regional organizations like the African Union. That would be very much an interest of mine. And please be so kind to stick to the 10-minute limit of your presentation so that we can have some time to share with the audience here. So with regard to the presentations, the order of presentations, I think we'll just go by the program as it is listed here. And as I can see, we will have Mr. Carlos from Brazil. Maybe as you start, you can say a few words about your institution and how it sort of relates to the military and defense architecture in Brazil. Thank you, Mr. Carlos.
It's a privilege to be
here. Sorry, I made a big mistake.
No?
There's a line here in the program, so which led me to Mr. Carlos, but sorry, Mr. Dennis is first. I apologize. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here talking about South-South cooperation. Usually, a lot of the forums that I'm in, I'm trying to get a word into South-South cooperation. And today, the whole day, we're talking about it. I'm from the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. I'm based in Bangkok, Thailand. I cover the Asia-Pacific region, but I'm also an African from Zimbabwe. This morning, we heard that over 170 wars are ongoing, and that most of those are taking place in the South. This is an important statistics because it shows that we have a lot of work to do if South-South cooperation has to be applied in the area of peace building and conflict management. Recently, I had an experience where I was working with a regional institution mapping their South-South cooperation. And what struck me was looking at their charter, that one of the first things that are outlined is that they were being created to maintain peace in the region, to promote peace in the region. So for me, that shows that a number of countries have, for a long time, been open to the prospects of the regional institutions promoting peace and forming them for the purpose of promoting peace. But what struck me also is that in looking at more detail in terms of what they were doing, and we were trying to reconcile what they are doing with the work that is being done under the SDGs. There was in particular an area on resiliency. And on resiliency, there was a lot of information on natural disasters. We focused a lot on natural disasters. We focused a lot on economic shocks. However, there was very little on peace building or conflict prevention. So this in a way shows that we have this idea that conflict prevention is important, and yet sometimes we do shy from it, as the moderator was saying. We look at climate change, we look at other damage. But if we look today in terms of some of the impacts that we have had from conflict, I think we can all agree that it takes countries way back in terms of development. It disrupts countries for a very, very long time. Whereas a natural disaster may happen for a short time, some conflicts have gone on for years and years. And another point I wanted to make is that it's so important in peace building and conflict management to work with the neighbors. And why is it so? The main reason is that a lot of the conflicts happen because a neighbor or another country or some countries in the region may actually provide safe havens for people that are fighting within a country. And as has been said this morning, we realize that most of the conflicts that are taking place are actually in parts of the country. We rarely have countries fighting against each other. So if they're in some part of the country, it happens sometimes that the neighboring country may be a safe haven, and that the rebels may be getting resources from that country, that they may be escaping and hiding in that country, and may even have some sympathies from that country. And so it's very important to have a good neighbor policy for the other countries in the region to be supportive. Another point that I wanted to raise is whether the principles of South-South cooperation about non-conditionality, non-interference, actually make it difficult for South-South cooperation to be applied in the area of peace building and conflict management. I think again this morning we touched on it when somebody referred to responsible sovereignty. That means that we have realized the limitations, that if we go with the principles at face value, it will not help us to resolve this problem. That's why there has to be the insertion of the responsibility of sovereignty. Now, I wanted to conclude by saying that instead of equating South-South cooperation to what we do at the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, I see South-South cooperation as broader, as being led by the countries themselves. And why is that so? It is that we in the United Nations system, and I have colleagues that are working in this area, my role here is just to project a little bit of what they've been doing. They've taken the Secretary General's Sustaining Peace document, and we have tried as the UN Office for South-South Cooperation to get a concept, a strategy going for how South-South cooperation can be brought about in addressing these issues. And I think what has struck me most is that how similar this is to the development process. For example, we have realized that it is very important for the countries that are affected to have the ownership of the process. And also that it is very important to have a multi-sectoral approach to peace building. In the case of the United Nations system, all UN agencies coming aboard to address the issue. And also we have realized that it is important to have prevention, just like in disaster reduction. You have to have prevention before it happens. And in case it happens, during the process of addressing it, you have to be looking at prevention for the future. And then even if you manage to arrest the conflict, you have to work all the time to be able to prevent a recurrence of the conflict. Now, I wanted to mention one very little thing about South-South cooperation and the way that we engage countries, the protagonists. I think we've had a lot of experiences where from the north, we tend to point out at countries when we think they are erring. We tend to have conditionality, we introduce sanctions. But if you look at it from a cultural context, and particularly from the south, the region that I've been working in, it's very important for people not to lose faith. And therefore, you cannot shout at people in public and say, change your ways. It might be better to use another avenue where you use friends, use peers, and I think this is the context in which we can bring South-South cooperation to bear in this instance. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dennis, for first of all, reminding us of the prevalence of violent conflict in the world, particularly in the South, and the tension. I also find your point very interesting on the tensions, potential tension between the principle of non-interference and responsible sovereignty, because then there may be situations where the community of nations may want to move in and exert certain pressure on governments that are not fulfilling their responsibility, their sovereign responsibilities. And I think that's a very fascinating point to explore. And then I also would want to mention, and then maybe we can hear more about this later in the discussion point, that your office, UN Office for South-South Cooperation, and UNDP, you sort of coordinate a network, a global network on South-South cooperation. And I noticed through email communication lately that you have set up a working group to bring together, to draw together the knowledge and the experience in this area. So I think that would be interesting to hear more about it at a later stage. Okay, now with this, we turn to the next speaker, Mr. Carlos. The floor is yours.
As I was saying, it's a privilege to be here, and I would like to thank RIS for making this possible, and thank you all for your time. Please note that the views I'm going to express here this afternoon do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the Pandiaca Rogers Institute, where I work. I'm a career policy specialist, but I'm on leave now. I'm affiliated to Taiwan National University as a sabbatical. I still represent in this event the institute because I still have a formal affiliation with them, even though I'm on sabbatical. I know it may sound complicated, but that's how it works, how I got to be here. With this in mind, I would like to humbly offer basically two contributions to this conference. The first one is theoretical. After these morning sessions, it's actually easier to say what I'm going to say. I'm going to echo some of the views expressed here, especially the one related to the need of theorizing South-South cooperation, as opposed to those those who believe that we don't need to theorize or we don't need theories about South-South cooperation. And as remarkably as it may sound, we've seen commentators, not only in this conference, but in previous conferences, saying that to what extent we need theories of South-South cooperation. And maybe one basic argument is how can we support any policy today without evidence, without theories, without science? They are all interlinked. I also agree with the argument according to which it's necessary to challenge some basic assumptions of international relations theory as far as South-South cooperation is concerned. Sorry, I had a PowerPoint presentation, but I forgot. It's okay. It's fine. I can make it available later. I just forgot about it. No. It's fine. It's fine. Sorry.